I've never stopped for anyone on that stretch of desert. I own half the land that surrounds it. The other half fears me. People say I'm ruthless, cold, disconnected. Maybe they're right. But that day, something shifted. I was flying back from a private meeting in Phoenix. Deals had been closed. Money had been moved. The usual. From the helicopter window, the desert below looked like another planet, dry, cracked, lifeless. But then I saw her, a single figure crawling, falling, rising again. I told the pilot to hover. He hesitated. I insisted. When we landed, I stepped out into the scorching wind. Sand blew against my face like needles. She was lying beside a rock, her face burned by the sun, her dark hair tangled and dry. But her eyes were open and steady. She didn't beg. She didn't speak. She just looked at me like she already knew who I was. "Who are you?" I asked. "Nothing," she replied. I offered my hand. She stared at it. Then, slowly, she took it. Her grip was strong, too strong for someone who had almost collapsed. I brought her into the helicopter and gave her water. Silence filled the air between us, but it wasn't empty. It was dense, like she had stories carved into her bones. We reached the ranch 20 minutes later. My staff ran toward us, confused, alarmed. No one questions me, not even when I walk into my home with a stranger who doesn't say a word. I gave her one of the guest rooms. I had doctors called in, but she refused to be touched. She didn't want help, only rest. She drank, she ate, she slept, and that was all. Before she went to bed, she said something in a language I didn't understand. She placed a small pouch, leather, with feathers and beads, on my table. I didn't touch it. I left it where she placed it. That night, I didn't sleep well. There was a strange energy in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath. My cameras flickered. My dogs barked without reason. And just before dawn, my phone rang. It was security. "Sir, you need to come outside now," they said. I stepped onto the porch. What I saw took the air from my lungs. They were everywhere, on horses, on foot, surrounding my ranch like silent shadows. Apache warriors, dozens of them, armed, unmoving, watching me. And she was standing at the front, alone, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest. I had faced corporate sharks, government officials, even criminal threats. But this was something entirely different. The air felt heavy. My security team stood frozen, guns lowered but ready, eyes darting from one Apache warrior to the next. I raised a hand to calm them. Instinct told me this wasn't a threat, at least not yet. She stood at the front, the woman I'd saved. Her long black hair was now neatly braided, her face painted with patterns I hadn't seen before. She no longer looked weak or tired. She stood tall, commanding, surrounded by people who respected her, maybe even feared her. She took a step forward. I felt every eye on me. The tension was unbearable. She raised her hand, palm open. I mimicked her. Slowly, she approached, the warriors parting for her as if on silent command. She stopped just a few feet away from me. Her eyes met mine, deep and unreadable. Then she spoke. "You saved me," she said softly. "You didn't have to. You didn't know who I was." I swallowed hard. "You needed help," I replied. She smiled faintly and then turned. With a single gesture, the warriors behind her moved as one. They advanced, but not with weapons raised. They carried bundles, blankets, carved wooden objects, woven baskets. They placed them gently at my feet, one after another, like offerings. My staff watched in stunned silence. "These are gifts," she said, "from my people. You showed honor. You showed heart. We do not forget." I felt something inside me twist. I was a man who believed in deals, transactions, leverage. I had never done anything purely out of kindness. I had never expected anything without a price. But here I was, being honored by a people I barely knew for a gesture I hadn't thought twice about. She looked at me again, her eyes glistening in the morning light. "Thank you," she whispered. And just like that, they turned. One by one, the warriors mounted their horses. They moved in silent precision, like a dance rehearsed 1,000 times. And within minutes, they were gone, leaving only the gifts, leaving only me, standing there speechless. I stood there for a long time after they left. The wind swept across the ranch, lifting small clouds of dust around my boots. My staff began to gather behind me, whispering, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. I finally turned and walked back inside, leaving the bundles untouched for now. I needed a moment alone. In my study, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, hands trembling slightly. I stared at the leather pouch she had left the night before. Carefully, I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a small carved stone, smooth and warm to the touch, with markings I didn't recognize. I sat back, trying to process what had just happened. Why had I really stopped for her yesterday? Was it guilt, boredom, or something deeper I hadn't admitted to myself? My life had been built on control, on knowing the terms, the players, the stakes. But none of this had been part of any plan. And yet, it had shaken me more than any boardroom battle or million-dollar deal. A knock on the door pulled me back. It was Marcus, my head of security. "Sir, what do you want us to do with the gifts outside?" he asked, his voice unusually soft. I stood up. "Leave them," I said. He hesitated. "You sure?" I nodded. "Yes. Leave them." I walked out with him back onto the porch. Under the morning sun, I saw the bundles more clearly, handcrafted blankets with intricate patterns, wooden sculptures, baskets filled with herbs and small stones, tools shaped by hand. They weren't just objects. They were pieces of a world, of a culture I knew nothing about. My staff watched as I knelt down and touched one of the blankets. The fabric was coarse but strong, woven with a skill that spoke of generations. I felt a strange wave of humility rush over me. I realized then how little I understood about the land I had built my empire on, how little I knew about the people who had been here long before I arrived. For the first time in years, I felt small, but not in a bad way, in a way that cracked something open inside me. As I stood up, I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in the glass of the ranch house, the same expensive suit, the same polished shoes. But something in my eyes was different. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing, would never look at this land or its people the same way again. The days that followed felt quieter somehow, not because there was less noise, but because there was more listening. I found myself walking the edges of my property alone, not to survey or inspect, but just to be there, to feel it. I kept the gifts untouched for a while, not out of neglect, but respect. I didn't want to treat them like decorations. They weren't trophies. They were messages. One morning, I sat in the sunroom, flipping through an old land report, when something in the back caught my eye, a scanned copy of a deed, an older one, a name handwritten in the margin, one I'd never noticed before. It was the same name I'd seen carved into that small stone she left in the pouch. Curious, I dug deeper into the records. It turned out a portion of the land my ranch stood on had once belonged to an Apache family generations ago, forcibly taken during an expansion project by the government, later sold off to developers, eventually passed into the hands of my corporation. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. This wasn't just about helping a stranger anymore. It was about returning something I never should have had in the first place. I didn't make a show of it, no press, no statement. I quietly arranged a meeting with a tribal representative. It took days to get through. I was met with skepticism, and rightfully so. When the meeting finally happened, it wasn't in my office. It was on neutral ground, a dusty clearing by an old well they said had once been sacred. I waited alone. Then I saw her again, the woman, walking toward me, calm as ever. Beside her was an older man with deeply lined skin and eyes that held time. "We remember that land," he said. "It was our grandfather's. It held stories, memories, spirits." I didn't speak right away. I reached into my coat and handed him the documents, the original deed and a new one. "I can't erase what was done," I said quietly, "but I can give it back." Silence. The man didn't look at the paper right away. He looked at me, deep, measuring something beyond words. Finally, he nodded once, not out of gratitude, not out of surprise, but out of recognition, as if, for the first time, I had done something that made me worthy of standing on that land. We didn't shake hands. We didn't take a photo. We just stood there under the open sky. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to something older than myself. That night, I sat alone on the porch, staring out at the stars. The desert air was cool, crisp, silent in a way that wrapped around you. I sipped a drink, but for once, it wasn't about the taste or the ritual. It was just something to hold, something to anchor me while my mind drifted through everything that had happened. I thought about how easily I had moved through life until now, how money had been my armor, my language, my compass. It opened doors, commanded respect, shielded me from consequences. But here, with them, it meant nothing. Honor meant everything. I remembered her face, the Apache woman. When I first found her collapsed in the dirt, I had assumed she was desperate, lost, a stranger needing help. But now I realized she had been testing me, watching to see who I was without all the layers. My staff didn't know what to make of the change in me. I could feel their unease. The ranch had always run like a machine, tight schedules, strict orders, clear hierarchies. But now I was spending hours outside, walking alone, pausing by the edges where the land met the wild. I started noticing small things I'd overlooked before, the way the sun painted the rocks gold at dusk, the call of coyotes in the distance, the faint scent of sage drifting in the evening breeze. There was a simplicity here that didn't ask for anything, didn't demand to be conquered. It just existed. I wondered why I had never seen it before. The next morning, I found a small bundle left at the edge of the property. No one saw who placed it there. Inside was a piece of woven cloth, delicate but strong, with a symbol stitched into the center, the same symbol that had been on the stone she gave me. I traced it with my fingers, feeling the rough threads. This wasn't over. This was an invitation to understand, to respect, to change. And for the first time, I felt ready. The next days unfolded like a series of quiet awakenings. I woke before dawn, the sky still ink black, and wandered outside to where the bundle had appeared. I laid it on the ground and watched the first rays of sunlight reveal its intricate design, feathers, stars, curved lines that felt both foreign and familiar. I realized I was learning a new language, not one of words, but of symbols, gestures, silences. That afternoon, I asked Marisol, my ranch manager, to ride out with me. She's tough, no nonsense, the one person I trust to tell me the truth. As we rode along the fence line, I pointed out where the Apache woman had collapsed. "Why would anyone come here?" I asked quietly. Marisol shrugged. "This land is beautiful, sir, but it's unforgiving. Few people survive the desert without help." We rode in silence for a while, the horses' steps echoing on the hard-packed earth. Then I stopped and looked out. "I want to understand it," I said. "All of it." She turned to me, surprise flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not here to control anymore. I want to learn from them, from this place." Marisol studied me, then nodded. "I'll arrange it." A week later, a small group of Apache elders arrived, not warriors this time, but storytellers, healers. They came to my ranch under a flag of peace, carrying books made of leather and paper, drums, flutes, woven mats. They spoke through a translator, a young man named Joseph, who'd studied languages in Tucson and returned to serve his people. We gathered in the courtyard at sunset. A circle of 6 elders sat on colorful blankets. I sat in the middle on a simple wooden stool. A hush fell over the ranch grounds. Workers paused. Dogs fell silent. The wind stilled. The eldest, a woman with silver braids and eyes like polished obsidian, began to speak. Her voice was soft but carried like a breeze through the trees. "Your gift was not in wealth," she said, "but in courage. You saw one of us in need and acted without hesitation." She told stories of her ancestors, hunters, farmers, healers, who walked these lands when the world was different, when treaties were broken and promises unkept. She spoke of songs that called the rain, of dances that honored the sun, of medicines drawn from cactus and clay. I listened, every word settling like dust on a canvas, painting a picture of a world I had never known. When she finished, Joseph handed me a drum. "This is yours," he said, "to remind you of rhythm, of listening, of heart." I lifted it, felt its taut skin under my fingers, the hollow wood, warm and solid. I tapped it once. A deep, resonant pulse rose into the dusk. In that moment, something inside me cracked open. I felt an echo in my chest, a heartbeat that wasn't mine alone, but belonged to the land, to the people, to the story that stretched across centuries. Later, as they prepared to leave, the elders gifted me a bundle of seeds, corn, beans, squash, called the 3 sisters. "Plant them," the silver-haired woman said, "and watch them grow together, as all things should." I took the seeds, cradling them like precious jewels. That night, I slept under the open sky for the first time, the drum beside me, the seeds on my nightstand. I dreamed of thunder, of rain falling on cracked earth, of green shoots pushing through the soil. And I woke knowing my life had changed forever. I woke with the dawn hymns of birds I'd never heard. The sky was pale lavender, and the air tasted of promise. I dressed quickly and stepped outside, the drum slung over my shoulder, the seeds tucked in my pocket. Marisol met me by the garden plot we prepared the evening before, a small rectangle of turned earth at the edge of the ranch's orchard. She handed me a trowel and stood back respectfully. I knelt and pressed the first seed into the soil, corn, then beans, then squash, 3 sisters, intertwined from the start. I covered them gently and patted the earth, a simple act of faith. We worked in companionable silence until the sun was high. I felt sweat on my brow, but also something like joy, a feeling I hadn't known since childhood. Later, Joseph visited with news. A rain ceremony would be held at the canyon's rim next week, invited, optional, but important. I agreed without hesitation. On the day of the ceremony, we rode horses up narrow trails carved into red rock walls. The canyon stretched below like a wound in the earth, its depths echoing with ancient echoes. At the rim, elders chanted in their language, drums calling out in steady rhythm. Smoke curled from a fire pit, carrying the scent of sage and cedar. I watched as they raised their hands to the sky, their voices rising in a melody that felt older than time. Then, as if on cue, clouds gathered overhead, soft at first, then heavy, dark. Lightning flickered across the horizon. Thunder rumbled. I felt rain before I saw it, first as a cool kiss on my hand, then as a torrent that lashed against my face. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, soaking into my clothes, my skin, my soul. The ceremony ended with laughter and tears. I stood drenched, surrounded by the people who had once been strangers. Joseph came to me, water dripping from his hair. "Thank you," he said simply. I nodded, words failing. That night, back at the ranch, I walked to the empty plot. The earth was dark, rich, smelling of possibility. I knelt and pressed my palm to the ground. It felt alive, soft, yielding, eager. I realized then that this wasn't charity. It wasn't a transaction. It was stewardship, responsibility, connection. For the first time, I understood what it meant to belong to a place and to its people. And I knew the journey was just beginning. The next morning, the sky was clear, the air still humming from yesterday's rain. I walked to the garden plot and knelt in the soft earth. Tiny green shoots broke through the soil, delicate, determined. I traced their stems with a fingertip, marveling at life's persistence. I spent hours that day among those sprouts, talking to them as if they were old friends. I told them about the life I'd led, the boardrooms, the parties, the deals, and how none of it mattered here. I apologized for the way I had treated this land, for the times I had taken without giving back. When I stood, my legs were stiff, but my heart felt light. Marisol found me there, hands on her hips, watching me with a small smile. "You talk to plants now," she teased. I shrugged. "They listen better than people sometimes." She laughed, then turned serious. "They'll need water and care. This won't be easy." I looked at the young shoots. Nothing worth doing ever is. That afternoon, I decided to invite guests, neighbors, local community members, even staff, to see the garden. I wanted them to understand this new path. I sent out invitations: "Join me this Sunday at dawn for the planting of our first harvest." On Sunday, before sunrise, a small crowd gathered. Some were skeptical, others curious. I stood before them in denim and boots instead of a suit, dirt still under my nails. "Thank you for coming," I began, voice unsteady. "This land is more than my property. It's part of our shared history. Today, we plant not as owner and subject, but as members of a community." I handed each person a seed to plant, corn first, then beans, then squash. They knelt, laughed when dirt smeared their clothes, helped each other stand. As the sun rose, the seeds slipped into the earth, and a sense of unity took root among us. Strangers became collaborators, workers became partners, and I became something new. Afterwards, the Apache woman approached. She wore simple clothes instead of the painted regalia, her hair loose around her shoulders. She smiled and said, "You have done well." I nodded, eyes misty. "We have." She reached into her pouch and pulled out a single feather, white with black tips, and handed it to me. "For courage," she said. I accepted it humbly, tucking it into the pocket of my jacket. That evening, as I lay in bed, I held the feather against my heart. For the first time, I understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or acres, but in respect, in relationships, and in the legacy you leave behind. And as sleep claimed me, I dreamed of vast fields of corn waving under a golden sky, of laughter carried on the wind, of a future that felt hopeful and alive. Weeks slipped into months. The desert changed shade by shade. After each sunrise, I walked the rows of corn, now rising waist-high, bean vines spiraling up the stalks, squash leaves sprawling like emerald fans across the soil. The three sisters thrived together, each plant shielding and feeding the others. Their quiet cooperation humbled me more than any lecture ever could. News of the garden spread. Tourists who once came only for photos of my mansion now asked to see the plants. I opened the gates. Children bent low, fingers brushing silk tassels on the corn. Elders closed their eyes, breathing the earthy scent, remembering seasons long before fences cut the land. One afternoon, Joseph arrived carrying a battered leather journal. He placed it on my porch table. "Our language is here," he said. "Stories, recipes, songs. The elders want you to keep learning." I traced the weathered pages. Symbols danced across the paper, curves, dots, strokes that looked like rivers and mountains and constellations at once. I felt like a child again, sounding out my first words. Marisol began organizing weekly gatherings. We cooked beans from the garden, roasted squash over open fires, ground corn into meal for bread. My chef stood shoulder to shoulder with Apache women, trading spices for stories. Flamenco chords from a ranch hand's guitar mingled with drum beats until the night pulsed with one heartbeat. During one of those evenings, the silver-braided elder pulled me aside. Under the lantern glow, her eyes glittered like distant stars. "Land remembers," she said. "It knows footsteps. It hears intentions." She rested her palm on my chest. "Walk softly." Her words settled deep. I started reviewing every business holding tied to indigenous lands, parcels I had never walked on, pipelines I funded without thought, contracts that felt clean on balance sheets but now felt heavy in my hands. Board meetings became arenas of discomfort. Partners raised eyebrows as I questioned long-standing projects, paused lucrative expansions, demanded cultural assessments. They whispered that I was losing my edge. I didn't argue. Edges cut. I wanted to heal. One proposal in particular gnawed at me, a luxury resort slated for construction on a mesa sacred to multiple tribes. Permits secured. Profits guaranteed. I flew to the site alone at dawn, stood on the cliff where red rock fell away to infinity. Wind howled through ancient canyon mouths like voices echoing a warning. I cancelled the project that afternoon. Shareholders raged. Analysts predicted losses. I could almost hear money sliding off spreadsheets. But when I imagined cement burying that mesa, the cost felt far greater. Days later, the Apache woman returned. She brought a small clay pot, tiny seedlings peeking over the rim. "Desert sage," she said. "It purifies." She placed it where my office once displayed awards and stock tickers. I realized the trophies of my old life meant nothing beside a living thing that cleansed the air. That night, thunderheads gathered again, rolling dark and heavy over the horizon. I stood on the porch with Marisol, Joseph, and half the ranch crew. Lightning tore the sky open. Rain crashed down, soaking us in seconds. We laughed, lifted our faces, let the water run through our hair and over our shaking shoulders. When the storm eased, the garden steamed beneath a silver moon, droplets clinging to corn leaves like mirrors reflecting starlight. I brushed a tassel and whispered a thank you to the night. Inside, I opened the leather journal and began copying symbols by hand, afraid they might vanish if I didn't learn them fast enough. The drum rested nearby, skin still taut from the day's heat. I tapped a slow rhythm, heart, earth, heart, earth. And for the first time, I sensed a bridge forming between who I had been and who I was becoming, built not of steel or cash, but of seeds, stories, and the quiet promise of rain. Autumn arrived almost without warning, cool mornings, crisp nights, a hush between the seasons that felt like the world drawing breath. The corn stood tall and gold, the beans dry in their pods, squash glowing orange beneath broad leaves. The garden that began as 3 humble rows now stretched across half an acre, green life etched against the red desert like a promise kept. Harvest day dawned clear. Families arrived from the reservation, neighbors from nearby ranches, even a few journalists who had caught whispers of what we were doing here. I didn't lock the gates. I opened them wide and laid long wooden tables across the courtyard, covered with blankets woven in bright patterns, gifts from the elders. We gathered at sunrise. The silver-braided elder led a short blessing in her language. I didn't understand every word, but I felt them settle into the soil, into my chest, thrumming like the first heartbeat of creation. Then we began picking, hands of every color reaching through vines and stalks, filling baskets with bright treasure. Laughter rippled through the rows. Children ran between us, faces smeared with dirt and joy. Marisol organized the kitchens, beans simmering with peppers, squash roasted until sweet, corn ground into masa for bread. The scent drifted across the ranch like an invitation. By noon, music floated over the courtyard, drums, flutes, a lone guitar. Shadows fled beneath the high sun, and the air glittered with dust motes. I moved among the guests quietly. For once, no one asked for a deal, a favor, a photograph. They asked how the beans were growing, whether the squash needed more water, how the rain ceremony had felt. The conversations were small, rooted, real. I realized I had never known how good it felt simply to belong. When the meal was ready, we served everyone, elders first, then children, then the rest of us. I carried plates to people who once would have carried things for me. I tasted cornbread still hot from the fire, and it was richer than anything my chefs had ever plated under silver domes. Near sunset, Joseph called for silence. He stood on a small wooden crate, the leather journal in his hands. A few months ago, he began, our stories lived only in elders' memories and fragile pages. Today, we add a new one. He looked at me, eyes shining. The story of land returned, of seeds shared, of hearts changed. He opened the journal and slipped in a fresh page. On it was a drawing, a tall cornstalk intertwined with a climbing bean and a sprawling squash vine, roots tangled together below, a solitary drum resting at their base. Beneath it, in careful script, was my name alongside the Apache word for bridge. Applause rose, soft like wind through leaves. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to speak, but the words snagged behind a lump of gratitude. So I lifted the drum they had given me and tapped it once, heart. The crowd fell silent. I tapped again, earth. Then again. The courtyard answered, feet stamping, hands clapping, voices rising, a rhythm older than money, older than fences, older than any of us. Twilight draped the sky in violet when the Apache woman approached. She carried a small wooden box bound with leather. For you, she said. Inside lay the carved stone I had returned to her people, now wrapped in a woven cord. She gestured for me to wear it around my neck. I slipped it over my head, the stone resting against my chest, warm despite the evening chill. What does the carving mean? I asked. She smiled. Home. The word settled into me like water into thirsty ground. That night, after the last guests left and the stars scattered across the sky like seeds flung by a giant hand, I walked the rows one more time. Crickets sang. The earth smelled of harvest and smoke. I knelt, pressed my palm to the soil, felt its cool pulse under my skin. I thought of the man I'd been, a billionaire insulated by walls of steel and pride, and of the man I was becoming, stitched now to land and story and an ever-deepening humility. I understood that wealth could build empires, but wisdom could heal them. I vowed to keep listening, to keep planting, to keep walking softly. A breeze swept across the garden, rustling the dry husks, and I heard it, faint but unmistakable, the echo of that drumbeat carried on the wind, heart, earth, heart, earth. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the owner of this place. I felt like its keeper.